The world's worst kept secret is a long-standing decay of the Western mainstream media.
Do you specifically condemn Hamas?
I just noticed that you've not condemned Hamas.
This is a genocide happening in front of our eyes.
The Israelis, as you know, will be saying that they are targeting Hamas only.
Israel's ongoing remorseless slaughter and systematic, intentional annihilation of Gaza has been enabled by compliant mainstream media. A mainstream media ecosystem that has consistently failed to accurately convey the reality and the facts. They've ensured only fragmented, skewed images of Israel's crimes are presented. A calculated decision to shield the public from the scale of Israel's devastation. The genocide in Gaza has been blatant, yet in enabling it, Israel hasn't just broken laws and resolutions, it's destroyed any remaining illusion of journalistic integrity. Nowhere is this collapse more evident than in Britain's so-called pillar of fearless reporting, The Guardian. Let's look at the wider mainstream media. Hind Rajab's brutal killing, the result of 335 Israeli tank-fired bullets, was reduced by the BBC to the passive headline, Hind Rajab found dead. Sky News described the grim massacre of medical workers as an alleged killing.
Now, the father of a medic, one of 15 people allegedly killed by the Israel Defense Forces, has called for greater international protection.
The Times made no secret of the hierarchy of human life, reporting that Israelis marked a month since Hamas killed 1,400 people and kidnapped 240, starting a war in which 10,000 Palestinians are said to have died. The Guardian, we're told, is different. It prides itself on being an entirely different class of journalism. It claims to provide comprehensive, fact-checked reporting to help readers make sense of events. They urge readers to support their independent and quality investigative journalism. But just like these other outlets, The Guardian has consistently fallen short. 10 days into Israel's ongoing onslaught in Gaza, which included an illegal siege amounting to collective punishment, a grave violation of international law, The Guardian reported on Palestinians, quote-unquote, dehydrating to death. There was no room in the headline or subheading for Israel to be named, subtly shifting the focus away from those responsible. The phrase "begin as you mean to go on" is appropriate here. On the 24th of October 2023, in its roundup of the day's events, it included the Israeli claim that it was targeting terrorist targets. One paragraph down, it included the death toll and the extent of the destruction in Gaza, which included not just the qualification that it's from the Hamas-run health ministry, but also that the claims of the casualties can't be independently verified. A few days later, less than 3 weeks into the bombardment, and despite the mountain of genocidal intent publicly expressed by Israeli officials, The Guardian ran a piece questioning whether the Hamas-run health ministry could be trusted. Was that really the most important and pressing issue as Gaza was being reduced to rubble? Then a few days after that, it released an article titled, "What is a Human Shield? And How has Hamas been accused of using them?" which included the line that they appeared to confirm that Hamas militants were using hospitals in the Gaza Strip to protect themselves from IDF strikes. This was less than 2 weeks after the Guardian's own apparently thorough investigation into the Al Ahli hospital bombing, which arrived at the conclusions that it was not Israel but a failed explosive. At a critical point in which Israel was systematically targeting hospitals in Gaza, rather than report on this grave violation of international law, The Guardian provided the necessary cover and justification whilst quietly manufacturing consent for Israel's crimes. And when it decided to cover the reality, it did so without conviction. When there were growing calls in Israeli society for Palestinian land theft and ethnic cleansing in Gaza, it was discussed in a Guardian podcast in November 2024 and was reduced simply to settlers preparing to move to Gaza, whilst in the brief description, the ongoing forcible dispossession was described as Palestinians fleeing. In March 2025, a thorough report was published that documented the extent of the horrors in Gaza as Israel intensified its bombardment. It detailed that the victims of Israel's deadly strikes were overwhelmingly children, and it cited countless doctors at the Nasser hospital who had been treating them. 1 day later, a Guardian report covered an Israeli airstrike on that same hospital. And despite the reality of Israel's indiscriminate attacks presented just a day earlier, the article uncritically repeated the Israeli narrative that the strikes were precise and targeted to minimize civilian harm, a claim made without caveat or correction. Not even the newspaper's own findings, which illustrated the opposite, were used to challenge this assertion and properly inform the readers about the reality. What was more important, the truth or Israel's propaganda? It would appear that's actually a tough choice at the Guardian towers. You may think these details are trivial and inconsequential, but that the linguistic devices and the attention to detail used to convey the news to observers differs depending on the actor responsible flies in the face of what responsible journalism is supposed to be. And I'm sure it has nothing to do with, as Declassified UK recently revealed, The Guardian's editor was among other editors who privately met with a former Israeli general 1 month into Israel's genocide. We're recording this at a time when there's been a slow shift from the media. The Guardian itself has published countless editorials demanding an end to Israel's violence and insisting that words matter when it comes to identifying and describing Israel's crimes. But words mattered a long time ago, and The Guardian itself used them to sanitize genocide and ethnic cleansing, dressing those atrocities in euphemisms. And sometimes again, using those words, they showed us exactly how this hierarchy of human life operates. On the 24th of June 2025, The Guardian reported on 40 more Palestinians being killed by Israel as they were waiting for aid. The headline ended with, "Say officials and medics." There was room for the headline to become an allegation and a version, but no room for the perpetrator responsible to be named. That was relegated to the subheading. But 24 hours later, when The Guardian reported on Israel's soldiers being killed in Gaza, there was no presenting the reality as a version. It was a categorical fact. The perpetrator was named and mentioned, and the nature of it was made clear. An attack, the headline said. So let's be clear, it's always been a conscious choice. What to omit, what to spotlight, when to state something as a fact, and when to frame it as a mere claim, when to blur the truth, and when to make it ring loud and clear. All this to prevent the public from connecting the dots about the reality of Israel's barbarity. Just a few days ago, The Guardian published an article about Israel's attempt to deflect blame for the engineered starvation in Gaza. It included the context that Israel is an occupying power and it has duties it must uphold. It used evidence to dismantle Israel's narrative instead of directly echoing it. Days earlier, the political editor posted a picture of a starving Palestinian child in Gaza with a poignant caption. It was a crash course in how performative outrage works, and they're all apparently oblivious about the concept of cause and effect. But it's too little, too late, and this self-preservation won't save them. Journalism is not something that you switch on and off. Indeed, if you actually zoom out and look at the bigger picture, The Guardian's output, the same patterns of systematic bias, of deliberate distortion and deceptive underreporting are apparent as the rest of the media. The horrific and gut-wrenching scenes in Gaza on loop and the devastating number of lives mercilessly taken leave no room for enabling the institutions and their practices that have sustained the incomprehensible reality. Part of that reckoning is to reconsider old entrenched mindsets, and that includes permanently putting to rest the notion that The Guardian occupies a fundamentally different space in the mainstream media ecosystem and amounts to a standard bearer principled journalism. When British Palestinian reconstructive surgeon Hassan Abu Sitta says that in the future genocide museum there will be a wing reserved for the journalists which enabled the horrors, I can't help but have sympathy for the engineers and the architects who are tasked with the difficult challenge of designing a room vast enough to hold them all, and there will be a lot of Guardian names among them.